I could have times when I was doing really fine and feeling good, and then all of a sudden I get sad for no reason. I don't know what's wrong with me. I just kind of get a bit like drained and so forth. And these particular losses that I had really affected my motivation, my willingness, my happiness, my ability to get on with other people, and just my whole general energy level in life. Um, and so these things didn't just affect me, it also affected people around you. So because if you're not feeling good yourself, you're going to have that effect on others. Okay? Now, before we continue, I want to just find out from yourself, and this is another test, an experimental test on use of the chat. Okay? So if you can pop your answer to this into the chat. Okay? This is a webinar, remember, not just a lecture. I'm not going to be just talking at you. I'm going to be talking with you, hopefully. And anybody on the other channels of YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, you can put your comments in, it'll come straight around to me. But I see everybody in Zoom directly in front of me here, so you're the ones I can get to directly. Okay, so the question is, why are you here tonight? Why did you click into this webinar? What is it that you want to improve about yourself? Maybe it's not about you. Maybe you want to help somebody else. So what is it that you would like to improve in terms of this subject? And I'm going to use this to kind of gear where I'm going to go with this lecture to see if there's things that I'll put in and things that I might take out. So if you don't mind popping that in the chat, that would be great. I'm just going to highlight you there. Andrew, Nikia, hi Nikia, and person, I like saying this, person ending in phone number 8059. Not to put you on the spot or anything. Just let me know why you came tonight. What is it that you want to find out? Is it just general interest, or is there something that you'd like to improve? Pop your comment into the chat. I'd really like to see what's there for you, what you want to improve. I'm waiting for a torrent of comments to come in. But there's nothing. That's fine. Okay. Look, if you do want to send me a message, you can either pop it in the chat, it goes to everybody, or you can send it directly to me and I'll see it here, right? If you'd rather do it that way. Because sometimes people don't want to kind of get their thing called out. Okay. So let me go into this with you. And look, I'll ask you a couple of more questions throughout. If you feel like it, you can participate and pop it in. If you have any questions as we're going through, just let me know. So let's launch straight into this. I've told you my story. Okay. What really changed the game for me was this subject of Dianetics. Completely handled it. There is a therapy in this book which really shows you how to get to the root of these things and be able to move on from them in your life. All right. Now, there's also techniques that I got help with. There's a book I'm going to show you about this later on. It's called Solutions for a Dangerous Environment. And there's what we call an assist here, which is basically how to help somebody to recover from a loss. So if you meet somebody who is being affected by a loss, there's things that you can do to help that person on an immediate basis without getting into the full therapy that's explained in this book straight away. All right. Now, I'm sure you've all heard the next thing, okay? That time is a great healer, okay? And you can let me know if you've heard that. Time is a great healer. Look, Vincent, all you have to do, everybody suffers from loss. People say this to me, by the way. Everybody suffers from loss. It's a natural part of life. You just have to learn to live with it. And you have to learn to let it go. And you know what? It'll be all right in time. Okay? The truth is that it does take time to recover from a loss, naturally. And it takes different lengths of time for different people. So if you've lost a friend, or if you've lost a family member or a child, a parent, lost a business, been through some trauma, it's not like one day it happens to you and the next day you're grand. It doesn't really work like that. It takes time to grieve. And as I said, it's handled by different people in different ways. Sometimes people need to have have the tears flow out. Sometimes people need to go and meet friends for a while, or disconnect, or go for more walks. And it does take time for you to get over the immediate impact of a loss. And what I showed you in this book, there's some really nice techniques in this book. What have we got here? We've got 7 or 8 really, really good, effective techniques that would help you to do that. Okay? But what about if you've suffered from a loss and it's like 5 years ago and you still haven't moved on from it? You still haven't it still hasn't changed. Or there could be a situation where you're not feeling great, but you just don't know why. You're sad all the time, but you just don't know why. So I'm going to explain to you exactly why it is that you've got such trouble moving on from losses. Because what should happen is that you experience a loss, you grieve for as long as it takes, and then you're able to move on with life. Okay? So here we go. And here is, we're getting into some basics here. The first thing that happens before you feel sad again, so let's say your loss was 5 years ago. The first thing that happens before you experience the emotion, the sadness, is the thought. Okay? In other words, you start thinking about the person. Okay? So let's say you lost your granddad and you're working away fine, and then you see a photograph of him and you start thinking about him. What happens then is the emotion. So thought comes first. After that comes emotion. So for example, you start thinking about your granddad again, you start to feel very, very sad and get upset, maybe start crying, and then the action follows through of the tears or whatever actions you take. Maybe you want to then kind of decide you're just going to turn on Netflix for the night, or take out a bottle of wine, or, your actions are determined by your emotions, but your emotions are determined by your thoughts. So, for example, if you came home from work and you hadn't seen that photograph of your granddad, so you weren't thinking about him, you might still be at that same emotional level as you were beforehand. So what happens first is you start thinking first, and then the emotion, and then the action. Now, sometimes it happens that that thinking is kind of happening in the background. And I'm going to tell you why that is in just a second. So before you start feeling sad or getting emotional or whatever, before that emotion kicks in, something happened with the thoughts. You start thinking about the person again. Now, the fact is this: there is something affecting you without your consent, which can affect the way you think. And I'm going to tell you what that is right now. It has to do with this thing that we're carrying around called the mind. Now, your mind is simply a collection of your experiences from the past. So everything that you've experienced is stored in your mind, okay? And in picture form. So as an example, try to remember your breakfast. Okay, did you do that? Okay, now if you could, and you can pop it into the chat if you could, it'd be great if you could, that would be fantastic. If you could remember your breakfast, what you saw there was a picture, and your mind records pictures all the time so that you can be more intelligent about what decisions that you make in life. So if you eat an apple and it's very, very hard on your teeth, you know not to buy such an apple again because you don't really like it or whatever. But if you buy an apple, red apple say, and it's nice and soft and juicy and it's delicious, you remember that so that you know, okay, you know what, I'm going to get red apples, not green apples. Okay? So your mind and the information that you have stored and your experiences determines your thought. So for example, if you learned how to get to Tesco, you want to go to Tesco to do your shopping, and you know what the quickest route is because you have a memory here of the quickest route, you'll decide, okay, you know what, I need to go get the shopping. You're going to examine the pictures in the mind so fast, and then you're going to come out with this thought, you know what, I think I'll go the back road. And then the emotion comes in of interest or enthusiasm, and then the action follows. Okay, now, there is a compartment within this mind which stores all the pain. So all of your losses, it also stores physical pain as well. All of your losses are stored in a compartment of this mind called the reactive mind. It's called reactive because it's push button. So if you lost a child, when the pain hits, this normal recording mechanism of your mind switches off to some degree or dims down, and the information gets stored in here. So we could call it a little separate compartment, and a compartment of pain. Records, or you could call them memories of physical pain or emotional pain. They don't get stored in this normal section. They get stored in a reactive section called the reactive mind. And as I said, the reason it's called reactive is it's push button. So all it takes is, let's say you lost your dog. Let me attempt to draw a dog here. I went to Latin classes instead of art in school. So what you're about to see is all I can do. Okay, that, my friends, is a dog. Okay, so you lost your dog. Okay, and that was, I don't know, when you were 10 years of age. Okay, and now you're walking down the street. And just see if I can make this up again. Okay, now you're walking down the street and you see a similar dog. All right, now you might see it consciously and it might remind you of the dog, in which case this loss gets triggered and it starts affecting your thinking. You start thinking about this dog and you can't really shake it. It's not easy to shake. It reminds you of your dog you lost and you start thinking about the dog, and then you start feeling sad or getting upset. Now, it could also happen that you're walking down the street and you see a similar dog to the one you lost, but it's just out of the corner of your eye. You don't even realize that you've seen it. In other words, you've seen the dog. There was enough similarity to what happened before to make it react or trigger. So this thing is starting to trigger, is starting to affect your thinking without you realizing it, and then you start to feel sad, but you don't know why. In other words, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you were feeling really happy. Now it's 4 o'clock, and you're feeling sad, and you don't quite know why. You think it's the weather. You think it's because you didn't take your vitamins today. You think it's because the boss got angry with you earlier on, and that's why it's a delayed reaction. But in most cases, what's happening is something in your environment triggered something buried in your reactive mind without your consent. Let's take another example. Let's say you're in a relationship and you love this girl to bits, and she said goodbye forever. Okay? So the relationship was ended. Okay? And that happened 5 years ago, and so forth. And you've managed to kind of move on from that eventually. You grieved and you kind of got over it to a certain degree. But the thing is, and this is the problem, is that the loss didn't go away. These things don't go away by themselves. They might move into the background for a while, but they don't go away. All right? So now, a person has had this loss of a girl he loved 5 years ago. Now, he's in a new relationship. Okay? And it's actually going well. He's in a new relationship and it's actually going fine. They've been together for a year and it's perfect. Okay? But one day they have an argument and she says to him, "Why did I pick you?" Okay? So she's very angry with him because he burnt the dinner. And this is their first real argument. He burnt the dinner, and on top of that, he was home late. All right? So she's upset with him, and she says to him, "Why did I pick you?" Now, there's enough similarity in that statement to what this girl said to him back then. So without even realizing it, this statement and this incident can trigger off that loss without his consent. It starts affecting his thinking. And so a thought goes in the background. Now, often he doesn't quite see it, but there's an underneath thought going on, which is stating that this girl is going to leave him, because that's what happened back here. So there's a hidden thought that's happening in the background where it's telling him this girl is going to leave him because that's what happened before. Whereas that's not the case. This girl has no intention of leaving him. She just said that to him because she was upset. But she's got absolutely no intention of leaving. The problem is he has not recovered really, and he's not completely handled this past loss. So anything that this girl, who's a perfectly fine partner and she's going in the same direction as him, she can just trigger him off, and he can turn from somebody who's happy to somebody who's sad very easily. And then she starts worrying about him. What's wrong with you? Did I say something? And he gets very upset very easily. So if you're wondering why it is that you can't shake these thoughts, you can't shake these emotions, you don't want to feel sad. You don't want to feel upset, and you don't want to feel down. Well, why is it that you feel down if you don't want to feel down? The reason is because there is this part of your mind called the reactive mind affecting you without your consent. And it's getting triggered off without your permission. Okay? Now, the second thing to remember is this. Can I just ask you, I'm gonna try the whole participation thing again here. I'm gonna see if I can get some response. Whoever gives me a response is going to get a little, okay? Because I've been very unsuccessful in getting responses on the chat today. Anyway, have you ever had this? You've lost somebody close to you. And you've gone over it many, many times. And you felt better about it. But then it comes back. And you feel as bad again, or worse. So you talk about it to somebody, or you try to get it out, or you grieve, and you're fine for a while. But then it comes back. And it just keeps coming back. Can I ask anybody in the chat, have you ever experienced that? Let me know in the chat with a comment. Yes, I have, or no, I haven't. Where you felt you dealt with a loss, but it keeps coming back. Again, maybe like a couple of weeks later, or it could be a couple of years later. Anybody? All right. Well, if you do want to participate and pop in the chat, please do. I'd be happy to see it. Okay. So, the reason why this thing doesn't go away, you've had a loss. Oh, Helena, thank you very much. Okay. Yes, your dad passed away 6 years ago, and I lost my dad too. Okay, so I understand how you feel. I really do. When you lose a parent, or a family member, or a friend, so much love has gone into that person that the loss of that person is a huge blow. It's a huge blow. And so you grieve and you talk about it as much as you can, and and so forth. And you feel better for that time period, as I've experienced this myself. But then time goes by, something triggers it off again, or you start thinking again, and the same thing comes back, and it's nearly as bad. It's nearly as bad. And then other people feel upset about you and worried about you and all the rest of it. And then you're okay for a while. And then it happens again, you're triggered, and you feel bad again. And it just kind of snowballs, and it isn't getting any better. All right? I'm going to tell you the exact reason for that in a second. Because It is called the reactive mind because you're not in control of it. You want to move on with your life. You want to be able to deal with life because you know that things can happen that are negative and things will happen in the future that are negative. We all have to face these things. And you know you need to be able to move on and be happy again. And it's a natural thing. The person, your dad, and in fact my dad, they didn't want us to be stuck in the loss. They want us to move on. That's the fact. But it's difficult when you can't, when you cannot do that. Okay. Okay, Sean, yes, and trying to convince yourself you're not affected by this fool's game. Yeah, and so often, thank you, Sean, for that. Often what people do is they say, well, you know what, it's fine, it's grand, there's nothing wrong with me, I'm just going to keep going and keep going and keep going. And you know something, sometimes people can be fine for a while, but all it takes is something heavy to go wrong again to trigger it all off again. All right, thank you. And Helena, my brother is building a house 2 fields away from the home house. Every time I go home, I feel cry. I understand. Okay, thank you, Helena. Now, what we have here is this: you experience a loss. It's stored in this compartment which we call the reactive mind, and all it takes is for you to see or experience in your environment something similar or something that could potentially remind you of this, knowingly or unknowingly, to trigger it off again, affect your thinking, and then affect your emotions, and then affect your actions. So that loss is the thing that's responsible for it. It's not the fact that somebody's building a house or you're seeing photographs of the parent every day. I know this myself, and I'll tell you something about myself. Like for me, my dad was a builder. Okay, he built houses for years, and when I lost him, without realizing it, I felt bad for quite a long time. And I realized that the main triggers, after I'll show you later about some of the techniques and so forth, was actually walls, believe it or not. Seeing walls was a trigger for me because he was a builder and he built walls everywhere. That was his job, really. The external stuff is not really what's the fault or what the problem. The fault is that it's an unhandled loss. And if that loss has been unhandled, if it hasn't been handled, no matter how many times you've tried, you've discharged it and it just keeps refilling again. You discharge it, it keeps refilling, keeps refilling. The reason that happens is because, and always and only because, there's an earlier similar loss. Earlier similar loss. Now, you might think, you know something, Vincent, that's fine. That's fine. But this one was big enough. And I understand that. But the interesting thing is that the loss that you experience a year or recently or two ago, it tends to connect up in this reactive mind with earlier similar losses. Okay? Earlier similar losses. Earlier similar bad experiences. And sits as the most recent incident on a chain. And what I'm going to tell you about later on in this technique of Dianetics, I've showed, some of you have seen this at the book, this is what this is about tonight, is that when you're addressing a loss, for sure, by using the techniques of Dianetics, you can get an awful lot to handle this thing, this loss. But normally in a session, you're not just dealing with one incident, you're dealing with a chain of incidents. So for example, if somebody lost a friend last year, they were knocked down by a car, okay, that's a massive loss. And that's all they can think about. That's all they can remember because it's the one that is so solidly stuck. But what they don't remember and what they don't quite see is the fact that they lost another friend 10 years before that who also got knocked down by a car. And then there's an earlier loss where a relative, a cousin, got knocked down by a car. And there's an earlier loss when a brother or sister got knocked off their bike by a car And maybe there's an earlier time when the person themselves actually got knocked down by a car. So what I'm trying to tell you is this, is that it's very important to handle that particular loss using the exact method that's explained in the book. But it's equally as important to understand that if that doesn't clear up, it always means there are earlier incidents on the chain. And what you have to do, and what's explained in Dynetics, is you have to get to the basic. Because if you don't get to that basic and clear that up, this is the source, this is the real source which feeds all these incidents and keeps charging them up, keeps charging them up. So if you handle each one of these, but you didn't handle that one, it just keeps charging it. As time goes by, the more it gets triggered. So in every session of Dynetics, when you're trying to handle losses, you're not only handling the particular loss that you're affected by, but you also need to handle the earlier incidents on the chain until you get to the basic. And there could be several different types of chains. For example, there could be a car crash chain, or there could be loss of a family member chain, loss of a business chain, loss of a job chain. So there are different chains of incidents that the person is getting affected by. It's not just one incident. Okay? And everybody wants to live. We all want to live. We all want to get on with life. We want to be happy. But what this reactive mind does, it's kind of there, and it was originally designed to kind of protect you from pain. But it's not a very logical part of the mind. So going back to this example of the guy who lost his girl, he lost the girl here 10 years ago. He loved her. Okay. So what should happen is he grieves for as long as possible, and then he's able to move on. Okay? And so in a new relationship, he should be able to just make this a new, fresh relationship and for everything to be happy again. But because he's carrying this around, this just keeps reacting and reacting and reacting and doesn't allow him to be able to think clearly and doesn't allow him to have the right emotions for the right circumstances. Okay? So that's the most major thing, is these losses don't just go away by themselves. They get buried in the reactive mind, and quite often, as you start into a Dynetic session, yes, you'll be aware of this, but you'll be amazed to find out that there are earlier buried losses on the same chain. Earlier buried losses which have to be dug up. You don't remember them right now. Maybe you think, you know what, they never even happened. I only had one loss in my life that was significant. Everything else was irrelevant. You learn very soon, as I did, that there are buried losses that are sitting beneath this chain. So it's important not just to handle a loss of your dad, Helena, and for anybody else who has a loss, but also to handle earlier similar losses and anything else connected to it on that particular chain. Okay, okay, Helena, it's where we would have done the hay and great memories, but he's not part of this memory. Okay, I understand. Yeah, I can see what you mean. So you see the memories, you see the situation, and then there's somebody missing from it. So it's a kind of a trigger. But honestly, it shouldn't be like that. It shouldn't be like that, Helena. If it's been so long, like I know it takes different lengths of people, different times to grieve, but your dad would have wanted you to get on with life and to live and to be happy. And this is what needs to be handled. Okay, so thank you very much for that. Okay, now, so that's the first and most important thing to remember, is that there's a reactive mind, it stores the pain, and it has to be cleared up as soon as possible. Okay, the next thing I want to go over is this, and this is a popular Irish expression. And this popular Irish expression, you can let me know if you've heard this. You can pop it into the chat if you don't mind, or give me a thumbs up, whatever you prefer. Oh, listen, it'll be grand. We'll handle that all tomorrow or the next day. It'll be grand. Don't worry about it, it'll be grand. We'll leave it for now. Anybody ever heard that or had that idea, or we'll do it some other day, or we'll leave it for the moment and whatever. In Ireland, we have a very common way. We tell everybody, look, oh, just it'll be grand, it'll be fine. You know, don't be worrying, we'll do it tomorrow. Worried about that at some other time. If you've heard that, or even thought it yourself, pop it into the chat. The problem with not handling this stuff immediately is that it grows. And what that means is that every time, well, let's just take this example again. He lost his girl, now he's in a new relationship, and every time they have an argument, he gets stressed, it affects his thinking, and it makes him sad. Every single time that happens, a new incident gets added to the chain. In Dianetics, we call it a lock. Now, it's not a loss, but it's a reminder of a loss. Okay, Sean, thank you. It's not a loss, but it's a reminder of loss. So every time you get reminded of a loss, knowingly or unknowingly, and it affects you, it forms a new incident on the chain and makes your reactive mind bigger, which absorbs more and more of your energy. And that's just one incident. So what I'm saying to you is that people say to me all the time, Vincent, look, losses are a natural part of life. People just have to get on with it, and you know they've got their own ways of handling it and all the rest of it. And I say that's fine. People take walks and they try to get busy, and they keep themselves as busy as possible, and they go to the gym much more. They listen to music much more, so they're not thinking about the person they lost, or they don't go to certain places because it reminds them of the person they lost. So people have all sorts of different tricks and ways of kind of trying to handle this type of stuff. But if you don't handle this pile of chains of losses and incidents, it grows. And the more it grows, the more buried that stuff becomes, and the harder it gets to find. And it absorbs more and more of your energy, more and more of your time, more and more of your life, and more of your vitality. Okay. Next question I have for you is this. In Ireland, we have obviously friends that we talk to about different things and so forth. And if you have a problem, usually you will discuss it with the person that you trust the most. And you're able to talk to certain people, but maybe not others. But this is also a very popular expression. I handle it myself. I don't need any help. Okay? I'm going to get rid of this chain for a second. Let me know if you've heard this from people that you've tried to help. I don't need the help. I'll sort it out myself, Vincent. I'll sort it out myself. In time, I'll work it all out. Anybody ever heard that before? If you have, please pop it into the chat or give me a thumbs up, whatever you prefer. I don't need the help. I'll do it myself. I'll do it on my own. Now, the thing about that is that it's not perhaps a wrong attitude. Everybody wants to handle their own problems. And we all have pride and we want to deal with our own issues. We do. We don't want other people coming over and sorting out our own issues. The problem is that this stuff here is buried. Now, not the incident or the loss that you're aware of, but everything else is nice and packaged down and so forth. So you can call this bad news or you can call this good news, is that you actually do need help on these matters. Specifically to do with this. Help. In other words, somebody helping you. Now, I'm not talking about, oh, he's going to go and get help, because often that's associated with a subject that I really don't like. And that is this whole philosophy of pumping people full of pills for their own happiness. Oh, just come here. How are you feeling? I feel sad. No problem. It's genetic. Here's a pill. We can't do anything about it. Good luck to you. Or You get upset all the time, so we're going to stick a label on you now. You've got emotional upset disorder, right? I don't like those labels. I don't like that approach, and I came across this in the 90s because it's the most traditional method I found and the most effective method. So when we're talking about help, we're talking about genuine traditional help, what we've had throughout the years. Okay? Yes, Eileen, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to handle it by myself. You try to help somebody who's suffered from a loss and they say, no, it's fine. I'll handle it myself. I'll take care of it. Okay. Now, in Dianetics, which is the subject that I encourage you all to do, I really do. I don't, like, sometimes it's very hard. Like, I've experienced huge change from this. I've helped a lot of people to handle emotional losses and so forth. But it's very difficult to try and tell somebody, oh, listen, you should do this, it'll be all grand. But until you start on it, you won't know whether it works or not. And so my job here is I want to try and encourage you to do something about it fast and get it handled. Okay, Sean, you knew somebody would say that quite often. Yeah, I don't need the help. I'll be fine. But it doesn't work. If you're trying to handle it on your own, it doesn't work. It doesn't handle it. Yes, you might get some temporary relief, but this stuff is so buried that you need somebody else to help you and to guide you to uncover it and handle it. And so we're going to go on to the next part, which is the solution. Now, as I explained throughout the webinar at different times, there are various things that you can practically do with people. There's a little booklet I'm going to show you at the end, Solutions for a Dangerous Environment. Yeah, they get worse, Sean's correct, they often do. And if you have somebody that has experienced a loss, there are different things. Like in this book, it explains, like, take a walk, and then a technique for handling a loss to help a person to feel better on an immediate basis, okay? So there are practical things that you can do to help somebody immediately. But ultimately, that loss has to be completely dealt with, and any other losses that are sitting beneath it on the chain. So what we have in Dianetics is a workable method to help somebody recover from losses completely and be able to move on with life. That does not mean that you're going to forget about the person that you lost, or you don't love them anymore, or it changes your emotions. Of course not. Of course you love them. But you'll be able to move on with life and recover and be yourself again. And that's the whole purpose of Dianetics. All right? So in Dianetics, we have something which we call auditing. The word auditing means to listen and to guide. It's done with two people. And this is all explained in the book, Book 3, Chapter 5. I'll tell you a bit more about that in a few minutes, because I'm going to tell you about the workshops that I deliver. The person who's delivering auditing is called the auditor. And his job is not to be a life coach, is not to give advice, is not really to open his mouth very much at all. The best part of his body is his ears. His job is to listen and to guide. That's it. Listen and guide. Not make an opinion, not tell the person what to think, not give his own opinion about what's going on. It's just listen and guide. The person who's receiving the help to get over the losses, they've got their eyes closed, but they're wide awake. And this person we call a pre-clear. Pre means before, and clear is the end result of Dianetics. So Dianetics is not something that you're going to do forever. It's not a way of life, something that you do for 15 minutes every morning, something that you have to positively think yourself. It's not about that at all. The end result of Dianetics is called clear. And clear basically means you back to yourself again. That's basically what it means. Because what you're trying to deal with in Dianetics are these chains of losses. Loss of your dad, loss of your granddad, loss of your grandmother, and whatever else is down here until you get to the basic. Because this one If that's not found and not handled, what happens is it tends to re-energize these ones that you thought you've already handled. And the way you handle it, the way you do it, is in the book, there's a 10-step procedure, okay, steps 1 to 10, which is done in a very exact way to help the person to return to the incident, re-experience it while he's wide awake, and be able to go over it with the auditor. And the auditor runs that incident with the person as many times as it takes in order to completely clear up any stress and pain that's actually still stored in that incident. If that incident does not handle, it means there's an earlier incident connected to it that has to be uncovered. And quite often what will happen is, as you're going through this one will come to view. As you go through that one, this one will come to view. And as you go through that one, this one will come to view. So it's a bit like clearing off the stuff that's sitting on top of the basic. So in this Dianetic session, you're not particularly only dealing with one incident, you're dealing with a chain of incidents until you get to the basic. And you do that with many chains over many sessions. And a Dianetic session is not just chitter chatter, let's tick-tock talk about anything and everything. It's a very exact, precise way of doing it. There's a set of rules that the auditor has to follow in a session to make that session work properly. And there's some basics that the preacher has to keep in, like enough food, enough sleep, and so forth. And these are things that you learn on the workshops, which I'll be telling you about. Okay, so that's what it is. It's done with 2 people. The technique is explained in the book, and it's about fully clearing up the chain of losses, not just the one loss. Now, it does happen that a person handles the primary loss and it makes a huge difference in their life, and they feel much, much, much better. And they feel like, you know what, I've completely cleared out, I feel great now. It's good, and that could last actually for years. But it's important to make sure that everything here is handled, because if not, it can often trigger off again. Because the root of the pain and the charge hasn't been handled. And so all it takes is enough triggers to happen again to bring the whole thing back to life again. This is why you could be talking about things until the cows come home, incidents that happen to you over and over and over again, and it makes no difference. And the reason is because you haven't got to the bottom of the chain. And that's what you're taught to do in Dianetics. And in our Dianetic Center, we train people on how to audit, and we also deliver this. But anybody can use the techniques of the book at home with a friend or a family member. Okay. Now, I want to tell you this, is that, and just think about this, you don't have to write this down. Let's say you've got all this grief and all this loss, and you don't do anything about it. In other words, and when I say anything, I mean you don't clear up these past losses or this chain. If you didn't do that, and let's say you had 5 or 10 chains of losses, what do you think it's going to be like in 5 or 10 years if you don't handle it? I'll leave that with you. Because quite often a person just goes numb after a while. They even forget what they used to be like. They think, well, now this is the way I am. I'm just a depressed person, or I'm sad all the time, or I'm grumpy, or I have no motivation, and that's just who I am. They tend to grow to accept a condition that's not really true, because it just gets lost. But what would it be like if you could clear up all these things? You got your vitality back. You got your interest in life back. And you were able to deal with losses that came your way much, much more easily. What do you think of a difference that would make in your life? Yeah, you're going to lose much more vitality. It's for sure, Sean. Yeah. It tends to get captured. More losses that you have, And you just start to become, you know, that's just me. I have negative thoughts all the time, and now I'm taking pills. Thanks very much. But anyway, I just want you to think about that. What would it be like if you could clear up all this stuff and you're back to yourself again, exactly what the person that you lost wanted for you, and that you could move on with life? That would be something special. Now, to handle this, what I've done is first of all, I recommend people, before jumping into auditing, they get a little bit of education until they decide that they want auditing, and to get a little bit of education on what's going on for themselves. And so the first step I recommend for everybody, and that includes everybody on this webinar, is an education step. So I've put together a series of workshops, 3 workshops, and the first one of the series is starting on the 29th of July, and it's called Dianetics Explained. So I want to tell you what this is, and thank you so much for waiting for me. I just want a few minutes to show you what this is. So it's 3 workshops. It's on Zoom between 8 and 9 on a Friday night. So we'll have the first one on the 29th of July. The next one will be the following Friday, and the next one will be the following Friday. And don't worry if you miss one. If there's some Friday that you can't attend, don't worry, we do them in a loop and you can catch it the next time around. But ideally, you should do one after another if you can. And on these workshops, I keep it very, very simple. We just go over one basic at a time. And at the end of the purpose of it, at the end of the workshops, is that you've got more stability, you've got more knowledge, and you know what to do yourself, and you'll know whether you want to continue with Dianetics or if you just want to leave it for another day. Okay, so workshop number 1 is basically called The Mystery of the Mind. And I'm just going to clarify what the mind is, because it's very straightforward. We'll clarify how is it that you know you're making the right decisions in your life, and what is everybody in the world trying to do. That's just a touch of it. In part 2, which is called The Mother of All Unwanted Thoughts, we'll really dig in to that root that I explained right at the basic. We're going to just concentrate on the basic incident and what started off all the trouble. And this will explain to you why it is that sometimes you don't think very rationally, or you have strange thoughts that affect your emotions and then affect your actions. And then part 3 is the effect of emotional trauma and loss. And again, I do a particular module on this alone because it's so important. In fact, it's one of the primary things to handle when you start off in Dianetics is losses. People can have had all sorts of things happen to them, but losses are a huge, huge part of that. Now on these modules, I touch over 3 key basics. But I also want you to have the book, the Dianetics book itself, and so I've included that in the package. So with the workshops, you also get the Dianetics book, okay? And this book has got like 500 pages on it. It's got a wonderful glossary, and it will make sense to you when you start reading it. It's just a very, very logical book. And I fell in love with this when I got it because it just makes sense. It's not glossed over and made to look prettier than it is. It's just basic. There you go. This is what's happening. Those are the facts. This is what works. Just go and do that. And when you do it, when you start using it, you'll see. All right? And you can start using the book straight away. So the book is included. If you're not a book reader, there is also the option of getting the DVD instead. Now the DVD is a 2-set DVD package, which is 32 mini movies, 4.5 hours long, and it goes over all the basics that are in the book. So the workshops include the book, and that book or DVD is sent out to you with free shipping. Okay, and the cost of the workshops is €30. That's what it is. Now, if you do it tonight before 9:30, to encourage you, it's €20. So we put that there, and there'll be a link going up in the chat there. Mandeep has kindly put it up there for me. If you enroll on it tonight before 9:30, it's €20. And the reason I put that there is because just to encourage people to get going. Because quite often people say, oh, you know what, I'll think about it, you know, and this whole thinking thing just goes on for too long and they never do anything about it, you know. The information that I'm going to give is absolutely vital to understand what's going on with you so that you will be able to make an informed decision about how to handle and improve your life. And look, if all these workshops did for you was help you to be yourself again and to handle painful experiences that happen in the future with more strength, it'd be worth it, right? Or if all it did was help you just to be able to move on from your past losses and to get rid of the pain from your past, I think that would be worth it as well. And you can do the maths on it, right? If you were to buy this book on its own, on our website, it's 20 euros. Okay, just the book. So you get the book and the workshops for 20 euros. So yeah, it doesn't take a mathematician to work out how much the workshops are exactly. They basically come free. They're free in the package. Now, I really do want you all, anybody who's on Zoom or anybody who's on YouTube or Facebook or Instagram, to really consider joining. Don't consider for too long, but joining me for these modules. I will personally take care of you. I'll make sure that you understand every section. My email address will be there for any questions that you have after the webinars. Each one of these modules, you can ask me any questions and I'll be able to answer any personal questions that you have. And I'll basically be able to tailor it for you because usually we have kind of a small group on the actual modules itself. It's worth it. And as I said, the whole idea is to give you more knowledge so that you then can make a decision where you want to take it from there. But at least give it a chance. You know, as I mentioned, I came across this in '92. I've always had the desire to help other people. This works. I don't like other approaches. There's some approaches that people use that are helpful, but I find a lot of them are temporary. They make you feel good for a few days or a few weeks, and then you're back to feeling terrible again. This stuff really gets to the root so that you can completely clear up this stuff for good. And that is why I've been promoting this for so many years. Okay. Folks, I hope you enjoyed this webinar. I'm going to end it in a moment and I'll leave the chat open for any questions. In fact, I'll stay around for anybody who has any questions. So I'll be able to answer any questions that you have on the chat. So remember that, oh, and by the way, I forgot something. If you enroll tonight, this book will be also included, the booklet. This booklet will be included free with the package, and it contains some really useful information and 7 specific techniques, lots of pictures there, that you can use on a practical basis to help yourself and to help other people. So that is also included tonight. So if you get it tonight before 9:30, this will be sent out to you as part of that package. Okay, so remember this. It does take time to grieve, but it happens that if you don't handle your chains of losses, they tend to get recharged and recharged and recharged as time goes on. And the longer you leave it, the more the reactive mind grows. So it's really, really important to clear up your losses and anything that's earlier connected to it using the techniques of Dianetics. It's a very, very exact procedure and it works. That's the most important thing. It works and it gives stable results. But don't just believe me. Get yourself enrolled on the workshops. I'll show you. You can read the book in your own spare time and you can come to your own independent decision about it. And that's the whole purpose of it. So I'm going to leave the webinar kind of open for any questions that people have. Before I do that, I'll just end off kind of. So I want to thank everybody who's joined me on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Thank you so much for being here. And if you have any comments, you can pop them in and it'll come around to me on Zoom. And for everybody on Zoom, I really appreciate you giving me your time tonight on this beautiful sunny day in Ireland. It's roasting outside still. Thank you so much. So if you have any questions, please take the opportunity to pop them into the chat now, and I will answer any questions you have. So thank you, Eileen, Nikia, Helena, and Sean. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here. If you want to sign off right now, it's totally fine. I won't take offense. Thank you so much, and have an absolutely beautiful evening. Okay? Thank you. All right, and so now we go on to question and answer time. So that's that part of the webinar over. Okay? And so who we have left? We have Eileen, Nikia, Helena, and Sean. Nobody left. Okay. Perfect. I love to see that. And so look, I know, Sean, you put a question there and I'll answer that in a second. You can put any question in the chat. I don't mind. Anything. And if I can answer it, I will. And I'll do my very best to answer the questions. And by the way, Helena, you're very welcome. Okay, Sean. You've only one question. If you're in a really restimulative environment, what's the worst outcome if you stay in the environment? Sean, it's a beautiful question. You know, it's interesting that people go on holidays every year. Why? To get out of the environment that keeps restimulating. And what restimulating means is triggering them off. You're welcome, Eileen. They go on holidays because it gives them a break from the things that are triggering them continuously. And often they're being triggered by things that they don't even know are triggering them. So the person thinks his mother shouting at him is triggering him, whereas it mightn't be that. It could be the sound of a car revving in the driveway that's triggering him. He doesn't quite know, but he thinks it's his mother. So it's quite hard to determine exactly what are the triggers, because your reactive mind is generally, it's a kind of a mixed up mush of an incident, series of incidents. So the problem with staying in an environment that constantly triggers you is that you'll have a tendency to want to withdraw from it regularly. Whereas if you need that environment and it's part of your survival, it's very difficult to do that. And it creates a situation where you want to be out of it, but yet you have to stay in it. But you want to be out of it, but you have to stay. And it creates this kind of a problem. It's an ongoing problem. You can't leave it, but you want to leave. And you kind of hung between two posts. And so that in itself, as a problem, can be a difficult one to handle. But again, it sometimes is necessary to move out of a stimulative environment, or a trigger environment, as we'd call it, in order to get space enough and to de-stress yourself enough to start handling the reactive mind. Because often, if a person, let's say, goes into session, right, and he goes home and his dad beats him with a stick every evening, okay, so he comes in for a Dianetic session and he clears up the incident that happened last night, which was getting beaten by a stick, by his dad with a stick. Okay, and he feels better. But then he goes home after session and his dad is waiting at the door with him. Waiting at the door for him with a stick. Well, what's the point in doing auditing if that's going to happen? Because you're just constantly going to be handling this constant stuff that's going on. And it's somewhat similar in a restimulative environment. If you're constantly in it and stressed and stressed and stressed, the auditing time gets occupied with handling everything that's happening on a daily basis, so you get nothing done. So sometimes it's necessary to take a break from the environment, get some auditing, and then when you go into the environment, back into the environment, those things don't have the effect that they used to have. And then you can start dealing with them. Because one of the reasons people don't deal with the annoying neighbor or the stressful boss at work is because it's too much for them. But once you've had some auditing and you've cleared up a lot of stuff, then you can go back in and you can actually deal with it. So to answer your question, Sean, what's the worst outcome if you stay in the environment? Okay, if you stay in the environment and you don't clear up this stuff and you're constantly getting triggered, it just grows. The reactive mind just grows. And look, that has different effects on different people. I can't tell you it's going to be the exact same for everybody else. But the longer it goes on, the more things get added to the chain, the bigger the reactive mind becomes. And finally, the person just starts to think, well, that's just the way I am. Nothing can be done about it. I tried, but nothing can be done. And I suppose if you could pick an end result, the end result would be apathy, which would be like, what's the point? And so you don't want to reach that level, because it's a tricky one to kind of dig yourself back out of it. Okay. So I hope that helps to answer your question, Sean. If anybody else has any other questions, please pop it into the chat. And again, folks, I would really like, for anybody who hasn't already, I would encourage you to do those workshops. They're very helpful. Good stuff, Sean. They're very helpful, and they kind of give you more of an insight into what's absolutely happening. I'll give you one little final story. I'll take a few minutes to tell you the story, and then we'll wrap up. And if nobody has any other questions, then we'll finish. And if you do have a question, you can sneak it in there. As I mentioned at the beginning, and I mentioned this in many of my webinars, I started off Dianetics to help other people. I got really good results with other people. I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. This helps people. It changes them. And so I tried it for myself as well. I got somebody to audit me. And I thought, you know what? I probably don't have too much to handle. But I hit some very, very heavy losses. And particularly losses that were buried. In other words, things that I had totally forgotten about, that I didn't think ever were affecting me, that I thought, that's just the past, whatever. But when I hit that in a Dianetic session, boy, did it explode. I think the auditor who was auditing me nearly fell out of his seat. His jaw dropped. He didn't know what to do, because I really hit a lot of grief. And I think in that session I must have bawled for 2 hours solid, because I don't know, I used up every tissue in Ireland. But at the end of it, I felt like a huge, huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders, and it made such a difference to my vitality, my energy, and my ability to think clearly. It made a massive, massive difference. And that, for me, absolutely sealed the deal. And it's why I want everybody to join me on these workshops. It's why I encourage people to get educated in this subject, because it helps, and for no other reason. Okay, folks, that's my little talk. Again, there's the 3 modules. It's Dianetics Explained. It's done at your own leisure. You'll have my personal email address for any questions. And if you need any help, you can always contact me directly. So I'm going to say goodnight to you all. The chat is going to remain open. If any of you want to sign up for the actual modules tonight, that link is going to be there for another while. The offer is open until 9:30 tonight. And so I will leave you be. Thank you so much for your time. Have a beautiful rest of your evening. Enjoy the gorgeous weather out there. Take a walk or wherever you want to do. And I will hopefully see you again sometime soon. Okay, folks? Bye.